everybody, welcome back to the channel. I am back out here in the garage today and I'm going to start working on the wiring for this motor as far as connecting that micro squirt harness to the OE Honda harness that is on this J32. I ran into a little issue here on this rear coil pack number 6. It is directly under that brake master cylinder. So the only way I can get that coil pack into the valve cover is by removing that master. I'm going to unbolt it and see if I am able to wiggle that free without having to undo the brake rod and the pedal assembly inside the car. That's just something I should have done before I dropped the motor in. I didn't realize it, but yeah. So if you're doing the swap, put the coil packs in the motor before you drop it in. You can do all the wiring stuff you need to with the coil packs in place. So I'm gonna go ahead and get into this thing and see if I can get that brake master removed and start to get all my coil packs in place, and then I can move forward from there. So I've got this thing loose now. It's off of the adapter bracket. The brake cylinder rod dropped out of the back of it. So keep that in mind when you're taking this thing off, if you have to do this way. Hopefully you're smarter than I am and you put the coil pack in the motor before you dropped it into the car. But now I've got this out of the way. I'm going to leave the brake lines attached because I don't want to mess with trying to get those started again. It can be a real pain in the ass getting hard brake lines to line up with a master, especially since these have been moved from their original location. There's a little bit of tension there, so I'm going to leave them in place. I can move this out of the way enough to be able to slip that coil pack into place. So that's what I'll do now. And then once I get all the coil packs on the motor, I'll start to cut away all that factory looming and minimize this original harness. Okay, you can see I've got the coil packs now on the motor. All the injector plugs are on the injectors. I've got the same thing done on the driver's side. So now what I want to do is start to undo all this factory looming and start to basically break it down to their just bare wires. Every injector has 2 wires coming off of it, and then each coil pack has 3. But I'm not going to need this factory stuff. It's going to be spliced into the micro squirt harness that we pulled through last time. So I need to start to simplify all this stuff, get rid of the stuff that I don't need, and then I can start to map it out with the according wires from the micro squirt harness. And what I'm going to do to start is I'm not going to connect them together and strip them down and solder them or butt splice connect them. I'm actually just going to probably zip tie them together so that I can map out my wire lengths so that I like what the harness looks like. I like where I have it routed before I start making my connections. That's the plan. We'll see how it goes. But yep, time to move on. The other day I had to remove the brake master cylinder to get that rear coil pack inserted, and honestly it made it a lot easier for this one too. And luckily Todd reminded me, like, hey, have you replaced the spark plugs on this thing yet? No, I hadn't. I'm gonna go ahead and do that before I bolt this thing back in, and that way I won't ever have to worry about this corner again. The harness, all that stuff I can do with the coil pack in place, but obviously the coil pack has to come out for me to change that spark plug. So got some new plugs and get those installed. And then I can finally bolt that master back on and forget about that. I'm also going to plug up this front port on the intake manifold. This is like EGR stuff that what used to be on the rear, so we don't need this open anymore. I want to plug that off, otherwise there'll be a huge vacuum leak inside the intake manifold. Once I get that blocked off with some JB Weld or whatever I decide to plug it with, I can sit the top half of the intake manifold on, and then I can loosely bolt the intake tube onto that, and that way I have my position of my throttle body, which houses 1, 2, 3 sensors. So there's a lot of wiring that needs to go out to the throttle body. I'm leaving it like this long until I have that position, and then I can finally start to make my ends for the wires, start to cut these, make connections. And once I'm done with that, I'm pretty much ready to start looming, cutting, crimping, all this stuff, and finally start to make this into less of a spaghetti mess. So I'm excited to get going today. All right, I've got the spark plugs changed out. I've got the coil packs bolted down, hopefully for the final time. My next order of business is going to be to plug up this port that we're not using on the front of the lower intake manifold. And I feel like the best way to do that, like the proper way to do that, is to remove the manifold from the motor. It's kind of a pain in the ass because of the bolts and where they are and everything like that. But I really want to do this right. So I'm going to go ahead and take it off, get it on the bench, figure out how to plug it up, and I'll knock that off the list. All right, this is the lower intake manifold on the passenger side of the car, and this is the port that we want to plug up. So when the engine was in its original configuration, this was on the back side, and this was an EGR port. It's no longer being used, so we need to block it off so there's not a huge vacuum leak. So I have a little bit of metal stock that's about the same size as this oval shape here. I'm going to chop some of that off. I'm going to stuff it in here with some JB Weld, get it plugged up. Doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to be functional. I'm going to go ahead and get started on that now. That's pretty good, close. I think I can hammer that the rest of the way in. And then fill it with JB Weld and call it a day. Try and minimize mess. All right, so I've hammered that homemade plug into place. I actually recessed it just a little bit so I could get a nice thin layer of JB Weld in there. And I ran across it with a razor blade. That looks like that's gonna seal, so pretty happy with that. And while I have this out, I'm actually gonna take the grinder just a little bit to the edge of this piece of the manifold. This is where it butts up against that J-pipe flange, and it's rubbing it just a little bit when I try and move it around, when I try and install it or remove it. And I don't think it's gonna hurt anything, just take a little bit of material off, give me a little bit more clearance. So I'll just zip this down a little bit and help myself out. Oh yeah. That looks like that matches that. So that's... Is that on? All right, so I've slipped the upper intake manifold onto the engine, and I just loosely bolted the intake pipe and the throttle body onto that. And the reason I'm doing this again is because I'm just trying to determine my wiring harness length. And there are 3 different sensors: the TPS, the IAC and the map sensor all on the throttle body, and then the intake manifold temp sensor, the IAT or MAT, I knew was going to be on the front of the intake. So I kind of grouped these wires together. There's still a common wire that goes to all these things, but I'm going to worry about that one a little bit later. These were just the wires that are labeled individually for these components. So I have them grouped together in this collection of wires, and now I can start to determine their lengths. Now that all the components are basically where they're supposed to be. The coil packs are in place, the injectors are in place, all those wires have been grouped together properly, and now I just have to start working my way backwards from the intake. This is the furthest part from the engine, so I figured let's start here. I have all these wires together already, but now I can start to figure out what the harness is actually going to look like. So it's real baby steps over here. This is completely new to me, but honestly, thank God, with Todd's help kind of getting me started and minimizing the harness for what I do need and help me with that part of it. It's just been kind of laying it out, zip tying the wires together so there's no big mistakes here. And yeah, it's starting to come together, it's starting to make sense. So yeah, one step closer. We're getting there, folks. It's taking a while, but we're going to get there. All right, well, after several weeks of fiddle farting around, I've finally gotten all the wires grouped together in the way that I need to. I'm going to go ahead and start crimping these together and start cleaning up this harness once and for all. So I realize this looks like a complete rat's nest, but what I've done here is I've gone through the complete harness from every single injector and coil pack, and then mated it with the according wire that I need from the micro squirt system, and then I've just spooled up the excess wire. So what that means is the grounds on the coil packs are all together on both sides. The hot cable for all three coils are together, zip tied together. Same with that side. And then you have signals. So this is the signal ignition out for coil packs number 1 and 5. And then on this side, we have 2 and 6 share ignition signal, as well as 4 and what would that be? 3? 3. So those are all zip tied together. It's just what makes the most sense in my brain as far as mapping it out. So now I'm going to go ahead and start cutting apart the already established connections and redoing them inside of some nice wire looming and heat shrink tubing, just to make it look nicer and start putting this thing together. So hopefully if I just take my time, it'll start making sense and looking nicer. So that's the goal for tonight. All right, I've got my coil packs already loomed out, grouped together as far as common power, common ground, and then there's a few 3 pairs that share a signal from the ECU. With the fuel injectors, it's even easier. There is a hot 12 that's shared with all of them, and then there's bank 1 and a bank 2 for signal, and I already have those grouped together, but that's really easy. This is injector 2 side, that is injector 1 side. So these are even easier to group together. So now that I got these done, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to getting these done. All right, finally some progress here. I've got my coil packs and my fuel injector harnesses all done. I've got them grouped together, connected. I've got them heat shrunk and loomed. And so those are all ready to go. The next step is going to be to make the wire connections for all the different sensors that are on the throttle body and the intake manifold. So I'm going to sit the upper intake manifold back on top of the engine here, and that way I'll know how long I can make all the connections for all those sensors that are on the throttle body and whatnot. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that back on and keep on moving. So I've already grouped wires together, zip tied them to their proper ends, but now I can actually finally start to put the sensors on their plug ends, like so. And I can start to cut and wire crimp all the connections and loom everything and kind of get it set to the proper length. So yeah, more progress. Now that I'm finally done with the engine harness, it's time to move on to the final stages of the wiring for this thing. So the micro squirt kit controls all of the signals for the coil packs, the injectors, the VTEC, stuff like that, and it has all the signals that go back and forth in that system. However, there are still a few things that you got to do outside of the micro squirt to get the wiring done. You have to set up switch power to send not only to the computer, the micro squirt itself, but also to all the different devices like the coil packs and the injectors, since the micro squirt is only sending ground signals. So I'm not a wiring expert, but luckily my buddy Mike Deerstein wired this car many years ago, and when he did that, he ripped out all that 40-year-old Porsche fuse box and wiring and replaced it with a painless wiring kit. This is like a simple hot rod wiring kit, but luckily for me, all the wiring in the car is pretty fresh, it's labeled, it's clean. So I reached out to Mike and he helped me with a wiring schematic of how to connect the painless wiring kit to the micro squirt system and everything else I need to finish off with the car. And I'll show you what I installed inside the car to finish it off. All right, as we come inside the interior of the car, you can see here this is obviously a race car. There is a master power switch here. You've got a fiberglass dash with minimal gauges on here. This is the switch panel for the entire car. And I was able to take power from the ignition switch as well as the master switch to activate this power panel here. It's a fuse block that I actually had from a different car. I've repurposed it and I've added the micro squirt ECU to the panel. That's this guy right here, but all these fuses have their own purposes, whether it be fuel pump, ignition coils, the injectors, bank 1 and 2 of the injectors, as well as the coil packs, IAC, and the alternator. So I don't love the orientation of the micro squirt inside on this panel because it sends the main cable into the car, where it would be much nicer to go up into the car, but I'm just recycling this panel for now and it's gonna work just fine. So hopefully if I've done everything properly, I can start to hook up the laptop to this thing and start to test signals. So keep your fingers crossed. So this has absolutely been the longest part of the build for me. Being so new to wiring, so green to it, it's definitely been my biggest struggle. The system itself is actually not that complicated. It's such a new world for me. So what I'm hoping now is that I can finally download the Tuner Studio software and connect it to the microsquirt and start to test systems. Now there's a lot of protocol in place. You have to disconnect power signals to the coils and things like that so you don't fry stuff. I'm gonna make sure I do a lot of homework before I start doing that. But as far as the wiring goes, it should be all done. I feel pretty confident about that. There's only a couple more mechanical things. I'm waiting on a set of injectors. Once I get those injectors in, I can actually finally put the intake manifold back on it, all the gaskets, and I still got to come up with an exhaust. So I'll show you what's going to go on with that in the next video. But for now, it's time to start doing some more homework and get on the laptop.